of things that you could be doing, so I don't take it lightly that you're spending a little bit of time here focused on this. So I really appreciate that. I typically start with just a little bit about my connection to this work. We did go over much of this in the introduction, so I won't be overly didactic, but I will just let you know that the title for this really kind of came from this concept of trying to straddle multiple experiences in Vermont and in our collective life in this modern time. And in my own personal life and professional life, I've had an opportunity to really straddle those experiences. Primarily, I come to this work from a real depth of lived experience with these topics that we've talked about. And that is something that has really informed my desire to help people that are still going through those have real support and autonomy and dignity and all of the resources that they need to have a happy and successful and vibrant life. So throughout the night, what I'm really hoping that you will do is consider the ways that you can also straddle those different experiences that you may have in the lens that you bring to it from your own lived and professional experience. With that said, I have a launching off point for us to consider from this incredible book called Gather, which our illustrious colleague Ryan from Vermont Humanities can surely help you access if you haven't already. And I just can't recommend it highly enough. There's a poem in this, and it's called Kept Out of the Woods on a Snowy Evening. And I'd like us to take just a moment to consider this together. Whose woods these are has made it clear. He does not want me hunting here. I wonder, does he even know this stream, the trees, those rocks, these deer? The yellow signs give off their glow at every 100 feet or so. The posted land, it shuts me down, but I have no place else to go. I want to punch, I want to pound. I know this land for miles around, over every hill, down every dell. I used to walk without a sound. But no one listens when I yell, although I have a story to tell of a way of life I loved so well. A way of life I loved so well. So this leads me to ask you to consider for a moment this question, which is Vermont for everyone? Is this place for everyone? And at this time, if we were all in the same room, not separated by our little Zoom screens in our respective corners of the states, I would ask you to break out into the different corners of our room and spend some time having an interactive conversation about this. But instead, I'm going to invite you to think about this for just a moment by yourselves. And what I'd like you to do is think about these posted signs in our state. And think about, have you been in a position where you felt the need to post your land for any number of reasons relative to safety concerns or any other thing you might be able to think of? And what would that feel like? And what were some of the reasons that led you to do that? And then conversely, I want you to think about if you have had an experience of exploring Vermont, hunting or fishing or foraging or trail running or walking with your dog or whatever it might be. And have you had an experience of all of a sudden there are some places that had been your favorite place to find morels or catch brook trout or whatever it might be that suddenly were no longer available. And what you saw instead was tree after tree after tree of post-it signs. And how did that make you feel? And altogether, does this point you in a direction of thinking that this place that we love is a place that really and truly is for everyone? So I'm going to close your eyes if you're comfortable doing that and just think about that for just a moment. we'll take just a moment to hear from a few folks in this room, if anybody feels comfortable speaking to any of those questions we've raised so far. How about you in the front?
Because just this week, my grandson was hunting on land that had been in his family, great-grandpa, over in Barnard for a long time. And the deer that he shot ran up into some land that used to be the family's farm even a couple of generations ago, but now is owned by somebody else. And the deer ran across into that, and they went after the deer. And the man who owned the farm now there said, you know, you can take this deer, but don't you step on this land again. It was like, gosh, you know, the ethics of hunting and this whole thing is very fragile now with ownership. And so anyway, that just happened this week in our family.
Wow, appreciate that. Other thoughts that jump to mind for anybody in the room? You know, just a few more words on this particular topic. The stakes can feel, on the one hand, very high. Do you have access to a favorite place? Are you really part of the landscape and the culture of the place that you live? On the other hand, it can feel relatively low. Maybe you didn't walk in one place, but there's another place to walk. Maybe you couldn't go to your favorite swimming hole, but you know of another one. I want you to think about this from a different lens. When we were kind of flashing through that title page of some resume stuff, there's a lot of words in there that can get glossed over relatively fast. They can have some emotional weight and resonance to them. We talked about things like homelessness, mental health challenges, substance use, those types of things. So to delve into a little bit more of my connection to this issue, I'll just let you know that I have a lot of privilege in my life, and I've had the opportunity to do things like study at the Harvard Kennedy School, or go to the Vermont Leadership Institute, or testify to members of Congress on Capitol Hill. I serve on my local school board, have a lot of access to power and to the ability to change policy and guide how investments look in our system of care, and I really appreciate that. Really recently in my own life also, I was a person who had to think about where I could sleep that night. And when you have everything you own on your backpack and you're trying to find a place to just physically put a tent and lie down and have a restful night and not worry about your safety or how other people might think about you if you're perceived as a threat or something like that, when you see a sign like that, it very clearly sends a message that that is not for you. You're not welcome there. You're not part of this place. And I really encourage you to think about the weight of that for so many people in our state right now. We have so much to be proud of in this beautiful place that we love. And at the same time, we know that we have almost 4,000 people experiencing homelessness across our state right now. And there's been an exodus of people leaving state-funded hotel programs as the funding has dwindled and the pressures have continued there. And that really does translate to existential threats for people, and in some cases that is a very literal thing. There was a tragedy recently in the community of Montpelier. Two long-term beloved people in the town who many people had known for just many years died in a tent outdoors just a few days from being granted a hotel room. And everybody that knew them knew that they would literally give you the clothes off their back. They volunteered every chance they got, staffed warming shelters, helped with anything they possibly could, and were totally beloved in the community. And you know, they died alone in a tent in some corner of woods that really shouldn't have been how that went down. So I want you to think about the opportunity that we each have in our own lives to cross that bridge between our different lenses and our different experiences, and the ways that we might extend some grace to people coming from a different perspective, and use some of the privilege and the influence that we have garnered in our own life to give people the tools that they need to be okay and to thrive and to meet their potential. And we're only on the first slide. We've gotten really heavy, so let's try to move along to some other terrain here. So this is another place where if we were all in the same room, we would break out in these conversations and spend 5 or 10 minutes getting to know each other and talking through some of these things. And then we generate a nice list and then talk about that as a full group. But I thought it would be a lot easier with the format we've got tonight to avoid a small group activity. So I will tell you a few of the thoughts I have about this and then encourage you to also think about it and to give some reflections that you might have on this topic also. When we've had this conversation in other parts of the state, one of the very first things that has come out of this is this idea that we are increasingly having differentiated experiences in contemporary life. You can find yourself spending entire days, weeks, months with people who largely agree with you, who have the same sources of news, who are having the same information, and who don't necessarily have to disagree in any substantive way or have any conflict about it. And as a result, we are perhaps less comfortable than other times in our human history about gracefully moving through conflict and finding that middle ground that we can agree on and collectively working through some of these issues of tension. In my own life, I can think of people in my family that believe totally different things than me, that have found communities of other people who believe those same things. My brother believes in a flat earth. And he goes to flatearth.globe and finds all the information he could want. Joking, glad you caught that. And my stepfather spends days making beautiful memes about climate change not being real and sharing them with his hundreds of friends all around the world who share them in turn with other people and agree that that can't possibly be real. And then I spend my days going to events, talking about the dangers of climate change, looking at information from other people who surely believe that that's the case. And, you know, we can think what we want about objective reality and science and those things, but the case in front of us is really one that has put us in these distinctive camps of spending time with people who have similar perspectives, similar lenses, similar lived experience, and really similar goals. And as we think about this chasm widening, what has been determined in so many of these conversations around the state is our best chance to move out of that is to find the opportunity to rebuild bridges with people that don't agree with us, that think about things totally differently, that have different experiences and perspectives, and find ways to actually get to the place of collaborating in real ways to overcome some of these issues. So that would be my hope for each of you after you leave tonight. You go off into the world and live the lives that you live and find opportunities to really spend some time with people who are different, who think differently, who have different experiences, and find ways to find concrete examples to make real changes in your community, in your own sphere of influence that will help us with these larger things that we're seeing around homelessness, around substance use, around mental health challenges, etc. Before moving on to our next beautiful slide, I want to give you the opportunity to weigh in about that a little bit as well. And please feel safe to pass if you'd rather not talk about it. But if there's something you'd like to say about it, feel free to jump in. What are some things? Yeah. Yeah.
Just within the last year, maybe 2 years now, we had a really difficult time at our local high school about transgender issues. And coming to a large meeting at the high school, there were lots of people at that meeting, but the anger and the animosity and the fear was so prevalent. It was scary because that was not my experience. I've been here since 1975. I'm not a Vermonter, but who and my grandchildren are in that school system. So that would be really nice if we could sit down with folks who were of varying opinions that night. But mostly it was we couldn't get away from each other fast enough because there was so much difficult feeling there. So I love what you're saying, but the reality is tough, isn't it?
That's what my
Beautiful
question
point.
was, is with such diverse opinions, and when there is such anger and animosity between opposing forces, how does one build a bridge? How do you answer to someone's fear about something if they don't want to hear anything about what it is, their self-righteousness or their opinion is so guarded? What works to build that is my question.
I think Vermont Public did or is still doing a program where they matched people.
Opposing views.
Yeah.
Vermont Public?
Yeah, Vermont Public Radio. And
Okay.
I wish I had more details, but I don't.
Oh, that's okay, I can look it up.
But there's an example of an organization
Trying to-
facilitating that sort of discussion.
So it would take facilitation by a group that's committed to working on that issue.
At least connecting people with
And
that
connecting.
intention, and yeah.
That's a really good example. I think that there is a tendency to go for the moonshot of trying to agree on the really big contentious issues sometimes that can be an impediment to really finding the common ground in the short term. What do we think about climate change or about immigration policy or about pick a thing? And I've found myself forming slow, gradual, positive relationships with people built on really small things initially, like, hey, you need to get the hay in, and I need some extra money, and I'll put the hay on your tractor, and then we'll go put it in the barn. And you do that for 2 or 3 or 4 summers, and before you know it, you trust each other and like each other and have, familiarity with each other to the point where you can then maybe talk about, well, why do you believe this other thing you said? And, did you think about this angle? And there's just some respect that happens that isn't possible when you're kind of on the other side of these camps where you don't really have a sense of like the personhood of that person. You're just an archetype of, oh, you believe that, or you're in this camp or whatever.
So making change takes time, and in order to make change, to begin with small steps, baby steps, by getting to know who it is that you oppose and building trust over time.
I think too, an important part of it is being vulnerable.
Allowing yourself.
Being able to say, hey, I don't understand why you think that way. I don't even know how to have a conversation with you, but I'd like to. And there's, honestly, there's no right answer.
Right.
Like none of us have the right answer.
The right answer.
The right answer sits between you and me.
Right.
So
You're not necessarily wrong. We're just different about how we're approaching the same issue. So let's talk about what we can do to meet somewhere with how we approach it.
My experience is kind of the opposite direction, like people that I'm already close to, and we kind of find out that we have a very different opinion. And maybe there's an initial conversation, and then we learn to just don't go there. Just don't talk about it. So it's probably not helping, but at least we still love each other.
I think that is helpful, and I think it is so helpful to be able to have that mutual respect, to say we're not going to see eye to eye on this, but we're going to continue to care about each other and have other ways that we can have each other positively in our lives, and that's no small thing. It's a really good example. Yeah, and it seems like there can be just, I hate to say the word mundane, but it's the one that comes to mind, things that are just common points of interest that can really blossom into these larger friendships and opportunities to support your community. Taught youth sports, coached for a lot of years, and that can be such a great equalizer. You're on the, playing baseball or playing soccer, and you're all there because you really care about supporting the kids in your community and giving people opportunities, and maybe you just love this sport, and you spend some summers doing that, and before you know it, you're inviting each other to each other's barbecues or whatever it is. And, oh, look, the election sign in your yard is the opposite of the one in my yard. And, what you brought to the barbecue, I don't need that. But hey, we're still laughing and talking about, baseball or whatever it is. And over the course of a bunch of years, you form that relationship that is going to get you to the next spot where you say, okay, we're not going to agree on mental health or on substance use, recovery or harm reduction or whatever, but I know that I respect you and that I trust you, and I know that we're not going to make any real improvement in our community if we don't pull in the same direction on this, so let's get together and try to figure this out in a way that has some real respect behind it. And I just don't think there's any shortcut for building those relationships. And I think part of the problem, the pickle that we're in, is we try to fast track that to say, okay, let's take a bunch of strangers that have no form of basis or shared experience or real mutual regard, and let's just right away find a way to work together, to trust each other. And that isn't how the trust thing works. Change moves at the speed of trust. It sounds trite, but it's just such a truism. So yeah. I'm going to pause for a moment and just give people a chance to add some other stuff to this part of the conversation.
Well, I think the other thing is understanding, asking questions to understand someone else's perspective. I think sometimes people think that if you're understanding or you're validating maybe how someone might feel, that means you agree with them. It doesn't necessarily mean that you agree, but you've got to be able to understand and validate it's their view. And again, I'm on the school board, so
apologies.
we have had some issues. And again, that isn't, a public comment session is not a venue for helping two sides that see things very differently come together. It's we're just getting a 3-minute dump of a perspective, and with a lot of times, some heightened emotion behind it, and that's not necessarily the right venue for really getting to understand each other's perspectives. So anyway, and again, it's sort of like, how do you, in our current society, we don't have as many times where people actually get together in an more informal way. I mean, people are in their houses, doing their things, and there's a little bit less contact, and it's really that day-to-day contact that I think begins to break down some of those walls that have been built up over time.
So all the remote work now has probably
Yeah.
lost a lot of that kind of coexistence.
And you were saying your book group here is going to read Bowling Alone, which was written, I think, in the early 90s or maybe 96 or something like that. Sort of okay.
Yeah.
Pre-internet, so I think it's only grown.
Yeah,
Since
yeah,
then.
I'm in that book group.
Okay.
And so I'm in, yeah, yeah. But yeah, it kind of goes up to 2000.
It was published in 2000.
But
Yeah.
And he
the same-
criticizes the last 25 years of 1900.
But
Yeah.
he now has a movie,
The
Right.
movie is linked to the book, based on the book, and
but current.
Oh, does it bring it up to
Okay.
It's
date?
a
It
current
rises.
movie, but comes from that.
yeah.
He's involved in it. I don't know who
Okay.
made it, but.
Does Randolph still has its bowling alley though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. Okay.
Yeah,
So that's good. I just I was looking to see, I can't remember the name of the VPR program that was mentioned. We talked to them recently, but someone online had mentioned the Braver Angels is a similar group.
Okay.
Gets people together to talk across the divide. Thank you.
you know, another phenomenon that you may have experienced that is something that's come up a number of times in my career is this idea that sometimes when we've collated these experiences of, you know, it's safe, all the same people that believe the same thing are in the same place to come up with a solution for the thing that we agree is the answer to this thing, whatever, you end up with a series of, you know, recommendations or opportunities for people that are meant to support a certain experience, and very often the people that you're trying to help have no buy-in to that at all, and didn't have an opportunity to help guide that or to really shape what it looked like or have any real power in that process. And then so you end up with like a youth center that youth don't go to, or a program to support entrepreneurs to build, you know, a catalyst for community development, and then where's the people that are starting the businesses or whatever the case may be. So to whatever extent those of us that do have, you know, access to the money and the deciding factors, the ability to make decisions and to set policy, can really leave some real seats at the table for people that have that direct experience with the issue at hand. It is such a powerful catalyst of getting real buy-in, and then that is something that reverberates through the community. People talk, there's word of mouth, you know, my experience really matters, there's a real room for me in this process, you should come too, it's okay, da da da. And it just makes, you know, such a difference. That was something that I learned firsthand when I was running a community mental health center, and I had all of these ideas about what would be healthy, what would be helpful for people. Let's have yoga, let's have art, let's have music, we'll have a, you know, a beautiful meal with all this organic produce, and people will come in and we'll make this, whatever. And then people, you know, didn't want to eat the, you know, quinoa, you know, salad, and didn't want the kale chips and whatever. And you're like, okay, what would it look like if we say we're going to spend $200 and you cook? And then suddenly there's 60 people there and they made, you know, whatever. And maybe you wouldn't have said that that was the healthy thing or the thing that people, you know, liked. I learned that lesson more times than I should have, kind of rapid succession. Like at first I thought, well, you can't have TV, you know, that's going to be like antithetical to, you know, human development, and you want to have art and you got to have music, and here's all these books and let's have instruments, and nobody shows up. And then all of a sudden someone says, well, what if we had, you know, a television? And you're like, I guess there's nothing left to try. Let's give it a shot, you know? Suddenly, oh, you walk in the door and there's 60 people in the living room who were experiencing homelessness, were, you know, at risk of death from overdose, had been runaway youth, were at risk of recidivism, all these things that we worry about. All the people who are trying to get into the center that didn't want to come to the yoga class, that didn't want to do the journaling group, suddenly, you know, they're watching, you know, like the Night of the Living Dead or whatever, and you could say that's wrong, that's not healthy, that's not pro-social, that's not mental health, but there's the social connection being formed. People have a support network, they have a place where they have autonomy, where they, you know, and then that turns into other things, and people form friendships and help each other and find jobs and apartments, and it's transformational for people, all from the thing that you could kind of shepherd or gatekeep and say was the wrong thing. Smoking cigarettes, same deal. That's not healthy, can't do that. Stop smoking on the grounds, no more smoking. The 50 people that were there, gone. Don't see them for a month. Give up, let smoking happen again. They all come back. Suddenly they're coming to the meal, going to the garden, slowly going to the yoga class, doing the stuff, going to the gym, you know, cumulative huge health impacts that you could immediately not have happen if you were very didactic about what you knew to be the correct way to do that. So just a theme I've kind of seen over and over, and a lesson that we cumulatively maybe are not learning as much as we should, that, you know, it isn't enough to kind of create a venue or to have some resources. There has to be real power for people that you're trying to serve in that process for it to really land. So let us now move to a story. So right after I moved to Vermont, I was dabbling in a lot of different things. I'd initially been a highway flagger, and I had the beautiful job of taking the highway flag and turning it from stop to slow, and then you could mix it up and slowly go from slow back to stop, and after a couple hours you'd have a chance to get back to slow, and very stimulating, engaging work. couldn't really hang for very long, so I found an opportunity to do some other things. I ran cash registers and gas stations at night and counted the cigarettes and lottery tickets and mopped the floors. And, at a certain amount of time, you're like, well, there's only so many, cigarettes to count. I've got to find something else. And started to do the dishwasher prep cook tour, how to chop the salad into the right size and make sure the things are where they're supposed to be, and all of that. And then sooner or later, I found a person who was a builder who wanted to teach me how to do carpentry. And that was a total game changer for me, because suddenly there was enough complexity that you could spend all day learning new things, and no 2 days were really going to be the same. And there was a chance to just really devote yourself to more challenges in innovation and trying different things. And it was a real game changer for me. That was a really interesting introduction to carpentry, though, because what ended up happening was we had this huge job outside of Middlebury, and it was to take a barn that, should probably be on the cover of like Martha Stewart Living as is, like, oh my goodness, that's the most beautiful barn anybody has ever seen. What a cathedral, what an homage to the barn vernacular. And to then systematically make that more fantastical and opulent. So we took this, 60 by 170 three-story beautiful barn with, the incredible wainscoting and original sash windows and all of these details, and very carefully dismantled all of those finishes to leave room for hand-hewn beams that we systematically put in, new joinery, and to cover it with barn board that we had got from these other barns all around New England, and to take the, the old steel latches on the sashes and replace them with, patinaed copper ones from the architectural salvage places, and, make it just this cathedral of, barn. And to do that, we ended up having to dismantle other barns. And we went around, maybe a 75-mile radius of that particular site, and went to farms in Vermont with the full knowledge and consent of the farmers, and took beautiful barns and dismantled them and brought the pieces back to this other farm and made that barn bigger and grander. And, it was kind of a interesting experience, because on the one hand, you were happy to be part of this huge engine. You're an ant in this teeming hive, and you're making this glistening castle, and you're at the top of artistry, using the best materials in a place where there's the most money and you can make the most incredible thing, and that was really kind of a special place to be as a craftsperson. At the same time, there is this foreboding feeling, this ominous sinking feeling that there's just something about this isn't right. This just doesn't feel like a good plan, that you look around and there's all these beautiful farms and all these barns, and then you go back and they're not anymore. Now it's just the field and it's empty, and that isn't there anymore. And I was really worried about it. And I got to talking to a friend of mine who was a mentor on that job site, this wonderful man named Wilfred, who was really kind of a poet's soul and a carpenter's body. And he let me know that this was incredibly beneficial to the farmers. In that particular area, the taxes were going up so much each year, and the college was building beautiful campuses and increasing the property value as a result of that in a way that rippled to all the surrounding homes, in such a way that the only way that the farms could continue to exist was if they reduced their taxes, and the only way that they could do that was to reduce the taxable items on their farms. So they were trying to see who could raise their hand fast enough to have somebody come and dismantle a barn and have less taxation on the books and be able to keep that farm in the family. At that time that was happening, in Addison County, they were losing 100 dairy farms per year. So it was just an epidemic of that. And it got to the point where I myself was looking to build a home, and this friend introduced me to a farmer friend of his who had this beautiful barn that he desperately wanted to have dismantled. And it was the same story. It was beautiful. I couldn't believe how nice it was, and I felt so conflicted that I was going to be responsible for suddenly there being this hole in the landscape where there had been this iconic barn. And he assured me that you're doing a favor to this person. You're really helping them out. It's okay. Don't feel bad about it. And I took his word for it until I started to walk back to the truck. And as I did, I looked over and noticed this stoic, burly, 70, 50, 80, who knows, person you couldn't really pick, crying really, really subtly, in a way that, you could almost kind of chalk up to, some allergies or, maybe something got in his eye, but he's definitely crying. And I gave him a moment and waited at a respectful distance. And when it seemed like enough time had passed and he kind of collected himself again, I went back over there and talked to him and said, we should probably go home. Wilford, what do you think? It's like, just one more minute, Will. I want to tell you something. And he said, as much as this is a great thing that you're doing and you're really helping this farmer out, when this thing got built, I was standing right here in the same place, and I was like 5 years old, crawling around in the grass, watching my dad and the farmer and all his friends put this thing up. And everybody was so happy, and we thought this was going to just last forever. And I can't believe that I'm here watching this thing come down. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. You should still feel happy. You're still helping him out. But you should also know that there's a real weight to this moment. And that never left me. And I think about that difference, that space between our different experiences. And we need more people. We need more resources. There's so much good you can do. Philanthropy is so helpful. There's nothing more important than the sense that everybody that lives in our community is vested in it and should be part of it. And sometimes we create these real schisms between socioeconomic class, and that's not the lesson that I'm trying to convey, but it's just so important to really hold that weight of noticing how different people's experiences are and how much influence we can have to really impact what those experiences look like, and to be perceiving that with open eyes. So that's a story that's always stuck with me, and maybe it will stick with you now too.
Is that the barn?
No. No, I wish it was, but it is not. But it's very, very similar. We dismantled a lot of slate roofs like that in the process of doing that. So in our last little bit of time together, I want you to think about two things. What do you think actually helps get us through these challenges that we're seeing together? And what are you personally willing to do to make things better in your communities and in Vermont?
Is that a trick question?
No. What do you think makes things better? And what are you going to do about it? To anyone in the room that feels like taking a crack at it.
Okay,
Please.
today we were talking about the article that was either Vermont, I think Vermont Digger, about the wood shed where people are donating wood, and it's quite huge, I guess, up in Vermont. And so, again, we revived this idea of establishing something like that with Capstone and other local agencies to get that option to be helpful. Because one of my daughters works at Capstone, does emergency fuel assistance.
Oh,
And
nice.
it's always, this time of year, she's a wreck because there's not enough money, there's not enough fuel. So this was a small group of people in a group from the church I belong to that said, okay, let's talk with Capstone and some other groups and see if this is something we could. Because in the article, it's a great article in Vermont Digger about fathers with their kids coming to, block up some stuff. And there are other groups like that. But, that's certainly something. And in Barnard, when they did that, if you needed a cordwood, you came the day that the blocking was happening. And you helped to put out your cord. So kind of like habitat. You help to build your house. If you need a cord, you come and help. So it's not, oh, aren't we nice dumping you a cord? Well,
It's a great idea.
Such a
Yeah.
practical.
Yeah.
There's tons of wood around, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they do something similar in Lamoille through the United Way. That's just a community institution. People volunteer and cut, hundreds of cords of firewood, and people look forward to it every year. It's a really powerful program. Great example. What else jumps out for people? And I would encourage you to think about this. Sometimes people are introverted and don't want to talk out loud, or need a minute to think about it and process it or write it down. So if you don't feel that comfortable saying it out loud, it's okay. But I encourage you to just go home and think, what might I do to engage a little bit differently or a little bit more to work on some of these issues in my community?
That's where I'm coming from. I've just spent probably 38 years in social work and counseling and working with mental health issues and social work around a lot of things: poverty, emotional responses, psychological responses. So I come from that perspective of people piecing their lives together or holding on to them and things like that. So I'm having to revamp at this point in my life how, with what time I have left, with what energy I have left, how and what do I do, because I'm not doing the counseling anymore. But there's also another piece to it, and that is that as an older person, I'm now on the other end of things with a very limited and restricted income, to the point that I'm one of the people that I counseled for many years. And so how do you help when you're one of the people needing help? And how do you go about doing that so there's this finding the balance of what you know, what you can do, or what you just can't do because you also need. So it's a really interesting place. So there's volunteering, because you have an experience and you have some expertise and professionalism, but you also have the emotional understanding of what it's like. You've been through floods, you've lost your home, you've done this, you've done those things, you've been there for people. So how much of what energy you have left that you can give from that perspective. You have no money left, but you can give in other ways to people who are going through something perhaps for the first time, or second or third, but who need someone to just know what it's like and can be with you in that place. Because many times there isn't anything you can do for someone. You just have to be with someone.
So well put.
That is what it is for now. Because without resources, and who knows with the upcoming year, in January, when that starts, I have to say that delicately, what we will be facing in terms of what resources will be available and where we fit into that picture.
That's really well said. Yeah, I particularly resonate with the idea of just being there with someone. You said so much, but that particular kernel is really sticking out for me in a powerful way. Thank you. Well, yeah, what else jumps out for folks?
I always struggle with sort of, sometimes I feel like volunteering that I might do, I'm kind of putting a Band-Aid on things. And then I look at kind of, all right, what are you doing to change the structure?
Right.
And that this is we're just continuing, and in some ways we're allowing injustice to happen, and we're not actually tackling the underlying structure that's causing it. And so that's a piece for me that I've grappled with since I was a teenager, really. Sort of that idealism of, come on, why can't we just do the right thing? and then getting just, because it's a fight, it is a fight against change is very slow, and you've got changes in power and willingness to try new things. You just have an economy that sometimes is just on its own. It's a freight train and it's going down, and there's an awful lot to try and steer it. So anyway, so I grapple with that, but I try and kind of balance, you know, actually doing the volunteer work, or before I retired, doing the work that I was doing, and then also just the activism of you know, whatever I can do at the very local level, the state level, and then the federal level to try and tweak the system so that we're not just constantly putting Band-Aids on things that really we kind of know, but we just, it's getting the political will to actually do it.
I think that's so well said. Yeah, there's so many of those structural elements for sure, and I don't think I've been in a conversation about Vermont challenges in the last 5 years that hasn't included the housing crisis, and that just has to be central to anything that we do, and this idea that we collectively have the opportunity to influence some of those investments and to really keep the attention on this idea of increasing affordable housing and the supports that allow people to really succeed once they're in that housing, I think is the absolute foundation of each of these issues that we're talking about. So that would be one concrete thing that I would try to kind of leave you with thinking about. You have this whole triage, all these issues to reconcile and think about and weigh, and they're all very important. And in this state, if we're going to solve any of these challenges, we need to exponentially increase our investment in affordable housing and supports, full stop. I think we're in our final moments. I want to leave a chance for any general questions that maybe people have, or to dive into any, things that you had hoped that we would talk about that we didn't talk about at all.
Well, something we can do, all of us, this coming week, is come to the vigil that Capstone's, is it Sunday?
It's on the solstice. I don't remember which night has been designated. I wish I had that right on the tip of my tongue, but I don't. I'm guessing, you could go to the website maybe.
Of whom and what is it?
So Capstone sponsors a candlelight vigil on the night of the solstice because it's the longest night of the year, and it commemorates folks who have passed because they were unhoused in that year. And it's usually cold and windy.
Yeah.
And it might not be where you want to be.
In Randolph?
Right in Randolph.
Right on the front
Chandler.
steps here.
At the library?
It's been at the
Not at
library.
Chandler.
It's been over at the railroad tracks. Maybe I should find out and put something in Front Porch Forum. That might be the best way to do it. But when we're all standing around shivering and stomping our feet, like, we have jackets, we have scarves, we have a place to go home to warm up, and
Other people don't.
a lot of people don't.
I think that's another thing, leading back to what your question was. One thing that I think is so important is that we all can do, and that is to have a voice about these issues that are shared with anybody and everyone in our lives. If nothing else, one person can tell 10 to 12 people at some point about the issues, so that we don't go to sleep, that we can at least keep people aware that this happened. We talked about it at a recent dinner, Jeannie, on Sunday at the church, when we were talking with the students, who were talking about how sometimes people don't see poverty, they don't see the homeless, they don't see the mental health issues. well, let's keep talking about it. Let people know that it's there. Because, and that we can do easily. I can talk all the time. I can share that with people. I can write articles. I can write letters. I can share the vigil that's coming up with friends. I can send emails to people. We need to take that responsibility on. If that's something we're committed to, if nothing else, letting people know so that they don't go to sleep with the fact that that problem is right outside their door.
Yeah.
You know, otherwise we become complacent. We let other people take care of it.
Yeah.
Or we think that the government will, and they won't. You know, we'll be talking about the same thing 15 years from now if we let it up to somebody there. So that's an important thing for me to see, that it continues, so that the young people are educated with it, so that they know the history of it, so that it's not continually repeated.
Nice. I think we have time for one person to have the delicious distinction of the final word. If there's one among you who would like to pluck that wonderful.
Could I ask a question for the
Please.
folks? I do a little bit of volunteering with migrant farm workers, and I've been giving some rides to folks who are based around Randolph. And I'm curious, what sort of supports exist for the migrant population in Randolph, or how much of a discussion is this in Randolph? I live in Barnard, so just a couple towns over, but since I'm not here, I'm not sure. Is the church doing things? Are other people doing things to support? Because I've heard more Spanish being spoken in Randolph than I have in 30 years, so, yeah.
Milk with dignity, right, Lynn?
With migrant justice?
Well, migrant justice,
Migrant
which you
Yeah.
know about. So I know a lot of the farmers here are really in touch with migrant justice, and some groups are talking about, it's kind of hard because you don't want to invite a lot of undocumented workers to one place, publicly say, hey, why don't you, that's.
They might not feel comfortable with that.
No, especially in the coming days. And so several groups that I'm involved in, we're trying to get out, the Know Your Rights flyers, the VAAP, Vermont.
Good idea, yeah.
Vermont Asylum, something network anyway, has free legal aid for immigrants. But just trying to get that, and someone I know who is tied in with the Hispanic farm community has said she's thinking about going around to all the farms just to kind of see how they're feeling.
Yeah, I guess I just bring it up because
Yeah.
there can be chasms there too.
Sure.
There's
Yeah.
a cultural barrier, there's language barrier,
Yeah, and I
there's,
think that definitely exists.
yeah. But there's also these overlapping issues of mental health and people not having enough to eat and people's needs not being met and housing being quite substandard in some cases.
So which is what I think migrant justice tries to help
Yeah.
with. And
That's,
they somehow know how to get into that network and how to reach those people.
Yeah.
And I don't know if, we have adult basic ed in office here, and I don't know how much English as a second language they're doing. Have you heard?
I haven't heard. There are some, they're not undocumented workers who are here. And I ran into a neighbor of mine who had a friend who was from Mexico City who works with immigration, and he's an American, and he was walking by their apartment and he heard them speaking Spanish, so he went over and he was chatting with them, and one of the things he learned, I speak French, I don't speak Spanish, so it's something that I need to work on, but so this guy, I then talked to this person and he said, oh yeah, these guys are working here, they'd like to learn English, and so a couple of us sort of asked around, and we did find out that the adult basic ed folks do offer English as a second language. I don't know if they were able to do it or not, because the company they work for, they work hard, they work a lot. I don't even know if they have a full weekend off, and they work late. So if adult basic ed is open until, 8-5, then
Yeah.
it's too late. I also had a conversation with a farmer and was asking, because I belong to another group where the 4 group was interested in kind of trying to be welcoming and supportive, and the farmer was like, and I said, would you, as the farmer, be willing to kind of share a little bit of, what we might be able to do to be helpful? And they didn't even want to have anything to do with, they were just like, no, we sort of stick to ourselves.
To not want any more attention.
Yeah.
It's too scary.
Too scary to kind of, so it's kind of an interesting situation. And here you are coming from Barnard to help out the migrant workers who are working here in our community. Is that what I'm hearing?
Or wherever, but it does tend to be Randolph recently.
Nice.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And it may be this group of guys, but they're working at a farm, or are they working for?
We'll talk later.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It's interesting. And then I spoke where the farmers market. There's a gal who brings some folks in from Jamaica. And I was like, I never see them in town. And she's like, they don't feel comfortable coming in town. Because they're just here for the growing season, and then they go back.
Yeah.
But they don't feel particularly comfortable coming. And that made me feel sad. I was like, what? How?
Yeah.
But, I have also traveled some, and I have been in a place where I'm the only white person. And it is quite intimidating when you are in a culture where you look different than everybody else. And people do look at you. And so, if you're not feeling particularly comfortable, so.
Good.
Anyway.
Really good point. Yeah, and a great thing to bring attention to. Well, thus concludes, you've squandered another perfectly good evening on Car Talk. Thank you so much for coming out.